same experiences. When I went to University of Washington on sabbatical, I show up and one of these guys coming. They have it's like BBI loft and everything. I ring the bell, they open up for me, and the guy goes, "Are you here to deliver something for me?" So anyway, that guy ended up becoming my friend, my running partner, because the running train is Brock Gilman. If you've been to Seattle, Brock Gilman is just near a fantastic trail. It's just near the university, so the gym center. Anyway, this man ended up becoming my friend, but he will never leave that down. I thought so it's no stereotypes, and Wayne had that, so I've always been trying to find a way we can feed him into our schedule, because he, and another thing that I didn't tell him when we were on the podium was that his background in physics and physics really similar to my brother. My brother came 72 and did a PhD at Oregon State. So he had some of those experiences where he probably had only one black man in the whole of the United States getting a physics PhD. So and Wayne has that to share, and he has experiences. And one of the things that I also admire about him is that he doesn't put his experiences or his blackness, as a glass. You don't see it. His science is the front of it. I think that's really, really great. I think people are always surprised if I even do research. So anyway, he's in electrical engineering. He's going to talk about some of those things. But one thing that he did from Virginia Tech that I have come to really appreciate. So he had this risk and the institution task force that he chaired. And one of the things that came out of that is some postdoc or faculty recruitment, future faculty recruitment initiative. So where students that are doing postdocs or senior graduate students get brought down to Virginia Tech, to C-Tech, and participate in departmental activities, and then in the future, that department tries to recruit them as a faculty. And so we met with the current director of that initiative, Peggy Lane, and I was surprised, that came out of your task force. So clearly he's had impact on the institution, and I think he would be a great example for a lot of you who are aspiring to become important scientists and to do great things. He's a little under the weather, he said, right?
Yeah, well, I'm doing my best.
So this is all yours, Glenn.
All right, thank
we'll
you.
give you free lunch too.
I'm always up for free lunch, so, okay. Thank you for such a complimentary introduction, and I'd always enjoy being able to talk to graduate students in general. And this is a very talented group, and I have great admiration for Ed as well. And so what I thought I would do, I'd like to not be too professorial and just spend the whole time talking, but I'd like to give you guys some opportunity to ask me some questions. So what I'd like to do is just start out talking a little bit about my background and some of the experiences I had as a graduate student. I won't tell you how many years ago, even though I'm 29, just like all 29, just like you. But I think one of the things I was asked to talk a little bit about today was what were my some things that I did that I think really helped me throughout my career. So I think that one of the things that I'll try to emphasize is that, and then some of the mistakes that I made as well, because I think one of the important things that you have to learn is that you shouldn't be afraid to make mistakes. And so goodness knows I've made some mistakes, but there have been a couple things that when I look back over my career now, which has been 20, 25 years or 30 years now, that have really paid off. And so I'm actually, my formal training is actually as a rocket scientist, and I'm very an unlikely rocket scientist if you look at me, because if you do, you wouldn't necessarily think that, because I come from a very compromised background. When you look at me, probably when I was a kid growing up, look at my background from my parents. My mom has an elementary school education. My dad at best has a middle school education, so I didn't come from a background where my parents were educated. In terms of knowing people who were in science or engineering, the first engineer that I actually met was when I was in college. So I knew no engineers, I didn't know any scientists until I was in college. Typical type of circumstance. I came from a very difficult neighborhood. I was expelled from school for fighting. Sometimes I won, sometimes I lost. I'd like to think I won more than I lost. I ended up with black eyes, ended up getting expelled from school for several days. And really, I came to a turning point when I was probably about in the 10th grade. And this is one interesting story that really sort of, I could have gone one direction or another, because I really hated high school. And it wasn't because I couldn't do the academic work. I had some degree of intellectual talent, because I was actually building computer circuits when I was in the 9th grade. And actually, when I took my first computer engineering course, when I was a sophomore in college, I already knew half the material in the book at that level. But I didn't like high school. As I said, I was expelled from school for fighting several times. Most of my friends had dropped out of school. I was bored with high school. I said, I'm just going to go in the same direction as my friends. And so then I sat down, and my parents, they were always supportive, but they didn't put any bounds on me. They didn't say you have to get this grade, you have to go to college, whatever, so forth and so on. But one thing that they said, we just want you to turn out to make a contribution to society. So I sat down with my mom, and she knew that I was at a point of going in one direction, a good direction, going in a bad direction. And so I said, I hate school, and she knew that I had stopped going to school. When I was supposed to be picked up at the bus, I sat with her and argued, made all types of excuses until I didn't have to go to school that day. And so I just told her, look, I'm dropping out of school. All the rest of my friends have dropped out. And so she thought about it, and she came back and she told me something. And this is a mother's strategy. She said, okay, it's okay for you to drop out of school, but you can't stay here. You're going to have to leave and go out in the world and get a job. And I was 15 or 16 years old. And so I thought about it. And she said, you think about it. And so I thought about it. And so that shows you that I wasn't too dumb of a guy. What would it be like if I actually, at 15 or 16 years old, had to leave home? Because I wasn't thinking about that part. I was thinking I was going to stay at home. Mom and Daddy were going to continue to take care of me, and I just wasn't going to go to school. But she said, no, it's not going to be that way. If you're old enough and you're going to drop out of school, you're leaving, getting your own place, you're going to go to work, and you're going to take care of yourself. And so I thought about it for 2 weeks, and I said, I'm going to graduate. so that was I think a big turning point in my life. One, because I could have gone in one direction or another, because I grew up in a very difficult environment, drug addicts, alcoholics, a number of people in my family were murdered, some people in my family were murderers. So that was a tough environment that I grew up in. So I ended up going to college. I was an undergraduate and master's student at Virginia Tech. So I went through Virginia Tech, did quite well. I graduated in the honors program here and did quite well. Went through on a scholarship, and then I was admitted into Cornell on scholarship as well, and went through there. And as Ed was saying, that was a challenge as well, going through Cornell, because that was probably at the time the most renowned program in the country in space science of its kind. And the program, to give you a perspective of how isolated it was as a black student to go through that program had about 50 or so year run. Probably it started becoming world renowned probably like in the mid 1950s, and unfortunately now, all of the faculty have passed on or retired probably maybe a few years ago. So if you look at that, that's probably a 50 or 60 year run as a premier international program. And there were only 2 black students who graduated from that program in about 60 years. I was one of the 2 in 60 years. And so, and I was actually only one of the 2 who actually ended up in a faculty position. And so again, I learned to go through very, isolated, how to survive in a very isolated, difficult environment. Now, one of the things I want to emphasize in terms of you guys, in terms of, well, what did I do right in terms of going through to become successful? Another story I'll try to tell you to link to this. One of the things is to always dream big, okay? One thing when I talk to students, and I do this fairly often, always dream big and always don't pay attention to naysayers, because if I had have done that, all the way back when I was in high school, at that pivotal moment when I had that discussion with my mom, maybe if I had listened to my friends, so forth and so on, I may have actually dropped out of high school at that point. But, and also from the type of environment that I came from, compromised environment that I ended up coming from, who would have imagined that I would have gone on to become, a rocket scientist who actually graduated from this prestigious program at Cornell. I went through my first semester there. I remember my advisor, this black guy, the first black guy who walks up in 30 or 40 years going through this program, and I signed up for these courses, and he noticed, they had students that came in from MIT, Caltech, Stanford, those types of schools, and I was coming from Virginia Tech, and I had signed up for courses. Some of them were harder than these students were taking. And how in the heck is this guy from Virginia Tech with this deep Southern accent just walking around and doesn't know where he is? How in the world is he going to last 6 months here in this program? And this guy was terrified. And then after the first year, I got all straight A's in all my classes. I outperformed the students from MIT, Stanford, Caltech, so forth and so on. And again, that was because I was always a dreamer, with a slow southern drawl. And these people, the whole time I was there, they were just scratching their head. How does this guy do it? And even some of my roommates, they were in other departments. They would always bring problems. It's this black guy in this room down the hall that knows how to solve all of these physics problems, math problems. I don't know how he does it, but go and ask him. And I would have a line at my door when I came in after class of these other students asking me to solve all these math problems. And so, but that's the first point. Don't pay any attention to naysayers. You know who you are. Each one of you knows who you are, what type of abilities, what type of talents that you have. Don't pay any attention to other people. Probably 1 or 2 years after I was at Cornell, some of my faculty advisors on my dissertation committee, they said, well, what do you plan to do in the future? And I'd always known, when I was a kid, well, I think I want to be a professor. I knew one day I was going to end up sitting in this chair, in this room, talking to young folks and trying to inspire them just like you guys. And so they said, well, that's great. I think, they said, well, yeah, we really think you got the talent, and, we are, think you got the communication skills. I think we're very excited about that. We want to develop you in that direction. And then they said, well, where do you think you want to go? They were even thinking, that they could, work with me and develop me. I could go to an Ivy League school. I was that good. And I said, well, I don't know if, I talking in a southern accent, I don't think I like the north that much. I want to go back down south. Okay, well, maybe Duke or somewhere like that. And I said, no, I think I might want to go back to Virginia Tech. And their jaws hit the floor. They said, why do you want to go back there? They don't have, space science. They don't have this area. They don't have that area. And so they were very negative on it. And then when I finished up at Cornell, I did my postdoctoral work at the Naval Research Lab again. I had moved into doing computational work there, computational space science. They were the best in the world for that at the time. And my postdoctoral advisor, he and I got along very well. He said the same thing. Why in the world do you want to go to Virginia Tech? I said, there's nobody there that works in the area. You're throwing your career away. I had some colleagues at Los Alamos. They said the same thing. And so, I ended up coming back here due to some personal issues. And all of my doctoral advisors, postdoctoral advisors, they almost essentially wrote me off. They said, this guy's crazy. I mean, why in the world is he going to Virginia Tech? We're writing him off. He's throwing his career out the window. He had a great opportunity. And so now I'm looking, in retrospect, 15 or 20 years down the road, we have one of the biggest programs in the country in space science. But at that point, if I hadn't have dreamed big, hadn't have had that attitude that even that there are naysayers out there, I'm not going to let them influence what I know that I can do. I may have to work 70 or 80 hours a week, but I know who I am. I know what I can achieve if I work hard. And so, if you look over in the Corporate Research Center, we've got a building over there. We've got about 8 or 10 world-renowned faculty members there. We've got about 30 PhD students. I don't know how many millions of dollars of equipment over there, and we're doing just fine. Our program now is actually better than the program at Cornell. On the slide, and I was told that we could achieve all this. So I think that's one of the things that I want to emphasize to all of you. Continue. Don't let negative words get in your ears. I know so many times that people have told me what I couldn't do. I never let that plant a seed in my mind. I always thought of what I could do. You can't, define who I am. You can't define what I can accomplish, with hard work. Now, so some of the things when I look back at what I probably could have done better, and this is things, a couple of quick pointers, and then I can open it up so we can have a discussion. One of the things that when I was a student as an undergraduate that I saw as I didn't think was very important, I said, well, if I know lots of math, if I know lots of physics, if I know lots of science, that's really the only thing that I need to be successful. And so that's what I spent lots of my time doing. But the important thing, and probably most of you realize this, but I just want to underscore it, strive to be a complete academician or a complete scholar or intellectual. And one important component of that is communication skills. That was something that I was very, very naive about when I was a student, especially an undergraduate. As I started to move up and become a graduate student and then a professional, I really started to understand how important that was. And actually, a person who is almost extraordinary technically, but a terrible communicator is probably not going to be very successful. A person who is competent technically, but an extraordinary communicator, that person's almost always going to be highly successful. You can always make up the technical part, but that communication part, that's something that you should work on. And this is a good time as a graduate student for you to start working on. And when I say, especially being in a STEM field, you know, there are three components of that. Obviously, you have the oral part, and so you should try to be in a position where you can go to as many conferences as possible. Anytime there's an opportunity for you to get up in front of a group and present your research, do that. Written part, write as many papers as you can. One thing that my PhD students get sick of me is I tell them every moment you need to have a manuscript in front of you. And so every day when I come in, I sit down right beside them and say, who's working on this paper? Or you working on this one and this one? Because I expect at any given moment they're working on a manuscript that they can be getting ready to publish. And also, something that's very important, at least in my field, as an undergraduate, you look at the grade point average. When you try to go out in the field, especially if you're in a scientific, basic science field, the thing that I look at as being equivalent to a GPA is how many publications you got. So that's something that's very important, so you should strive to get as many publications as you can by the time you finish up your degree. And so that's something that I'm on top of all of my PhD students all the time. Publish, publish, publish. And that really that really pays off when you finish up. You may want to apply for a postdoc. You may be trying to get a job here or there. The more publications you have, the more opportunities that's going to open up for you. And then the third thing, in terms of communication, you've got written, you've got oral, don't forget the illustrative. Because again, as scientists, we have a lot of very complex technical processes that we have to be able to explain. And so that's something that you have to work on as well. And so make sure that you're good with, how do I draw a diagram? How can I get up in front of an audience? And if I'm trying to explain some physical phenomenon, can I get up in front of an audience and can I come up with a cartoon and then really lead somebody through it, just like I'm telling a story, and then really explain something very complex to them. This also becomes very important, those of you who want to end up becoming faculty members. I mean, that's something that I have to do all the time. For instance, I teach a course called Electromagnetic Theory. Has anybody ever heard of that? Taking a course. It's a tough one. I get lots of complaints. The one thing that I learned when I teach this course is if I can do a really good job in terms of diagrams when I lead the students through this course in terms of explaining the physics of physical phenomenon of that, then it makes the course much less painful. So those are three important things in terms of communication skills. The other thing is that also at your stage, and again, as you are early in your career, always be thinking about strategies for collaboration, because you always want to weave as big a web as possible. These things are always important for recommendations. You want to develop mentors. These people are going to give you opportunities for doing research in the future, opportunities for working on a broad spectrum of publications. This is one way that you build your research list, your publication list, and so forth and so on. A lot of people, something I was taught when I was a graduate student postdoc, and again, you all may know this, the most important thing when you go to a conference, most people think is, well, basically, I'm going to a conference conference, the most important thing I'm going here for is to present my paper. No, it's not that. It's the collaborations. Okay, it's to meet other people, it's to meet senior people in the field. And again, the more senior people you know in your field, they give you those opportunities to build your career. You want to develop opportunities to do, to have governance positions in conferences. You just don't want to go there to present papers. You want to be over committees. You want to organize technical sessions, so forth and so on. And so those are two important things: the strategies for building collaborations, importance of communication skills. I was really naive about those, but as I continued to go up, I saw how more and more important all of those types of things were. And so I think I'll stop right there. And so those are a few under the cuff tricks. And some of you may know many of these, but I'll stop right there. Then we can have a discussion that some of you ask questions now.
I'm just taking notes, Albert, so you can, you can it's open. The skills is here, we gave him free lunch, so don't hesitate. While they're thinking about it, Wayne, so one of the things we also, we're actually trying to publish this aspect of our training program, what we call the practical science. So, what would you say about the relationship between a graduate student and their research mentor? Is that singular in and of itself? I mean, is that the one thing that the student must make sure that it works out? How does that work out with the politics in the department? Should the graduate student try to be political in their department, or just leave it to the research mentor to work the policy?
Okay, that's a very interesting question. Unfortunately, I think inherent in getting a PhD, it is a very political degree to begin with, and that's something that I hate to say. When I was a graduate student at Cornell, I saw some literally brilliant students there who did not end up getting a PhD just because they got crosswise in terms of politics. And they got on the wrong side of their advisors, and their advisors went in a direction that's like, no way in heck, I don't care how smart the student is, they're just not gonna get a degree. And I saw that, and as a band of other graduate students, these people were our friends. We had extraordinary respect for them. They had done things that part of our dissertations were built on. And I said, it's not fair that this student isn't getting a degree. They're just as smart as we are, but we didn't have any power. And so I said, I learned a lot from seeing several of those experiences. There were several young men and women, friends of mine, who did not end up getting their PhDs because of that. So I think a graduate student has to walk a very fine line. And I would say the beginning of the whole process, I'd say it has to start at the beginning. When a graduate student picks a dissertation advisor, that has to be a very carefully made decision. That's the beginning of it. And so that's why when I'm advising or working with students, new PhD students who come in, I have that talk with them, and I said, getting an advisor, it's almost like a marriage. You got to make sure that this thing fits. And I said, don't make a rash decision. Take your time, don't be afraid to go a little bit slow, talk with lots of people, just don't walk in the door and just grab the first person, just like you wouldn't walk in a club and grab that you see. So you don't want to do that. So you need to take some time and pick the right person and get to know the personality and look at the connections in the department that the advisor has, you know, what type of political clout. The other important thing is to talk with other graduate students that this person has worked with as well. So I think if you can, as a graduate student, if you can take your time and screen the advisor very carefully, I think you can alleviate a lot of those problems. But I think in terms of the politics, I think that that's something that the student, you don't want to get involved with. I think that you need to take your time, pick the right advisor, in my opinion, the right advisor, and that right advisor is going to be somebody that's going to stand behind you through thick and thin. You know, just like in the right type of marriage or relationship or whatnot. And so you aren't going to be in a position where you're going to have to deal with that. Like, for instance, you know, I graduated, you know, I had like 6 PhD students over the last year, and some of them went, you know, through smoothly, and some of them were problem children. And so, you know, in some, I was in a position where, for instance, I go in and you know, because of various circumstances, the other people on the committee, I remember I got up one morning at, I don't know, it was 4:30 or something like that, and I saw this email that came in this long before the defense, and this faculty member on the committee had gone completely berserk. There's no way in heck this person's going to defend successfully, and I'm going to do everything in my power so this person doesn't get a degree, and so forth and so on. But if I hadn't been Wayne Scales, I would have hunkered down and said, okay, I'm not going to let her get a degree, but I'm Wayne Scales, and I said, I don't care who the heck you are, she is going to get a degree today. And so I went into the committee, made my case, and made the other faculty members back down, and I knew how to be in a situation where I knew how to compromise. I knew how to be in a situation where I knew how to give them what they wanted so I could get what I wanted. What I wanted was her to defend successfully, get her PhD that day, and so we went on okay. So what I'm saying is you have to, the student has to be in a situation where, you know, you pick that type of advisor, somebody who's going to stick behind you, even if some controversy comes up. I'm just not going to be in a position where I'm going to be bullied around. You know, you have to be in the right as a student, because an advisor is not going to support you if you're in the wrong. But if you're in the right, that advisor is going to stand behind you, and being under those circumstances, you're going to be okay. So that's my take on that.
Very good. Tristan, you have a question before you leave?
I don't even know where you came from.
You didn't even know. Oh, you see, he used to host the graduate students organization, so you never went to eat with Shanita, you
We may do that again.
Trying to get her never invited.
We may do that again.
Yeah, now we're bringing him, we force him to do it. He's training all this. Yeah, Tristan has the TA.
Okay,
Yeah,
no
he's
problem.
all right, Randy, you know Randy.
Yes,
of course.
sir.
Yeah.
Very respectful.
Yes, he's the Don, I call him.
You mentioned about the political situation.
I'm sorry?
You mentioned about the political situation relative to professors, and not to get involved in that. But you also advise that when coming to the department, you got to choose your advisor, to get an advisor that is well respected by the other colleagues in the department,
Yes, sir.
and to be careful about, number one, well, that's number one, but number two, the other thing is selecting a newbie.
Young faculty.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, that's true, because what you're saying is true, that there's a correlation there, and I see where you're going with that. you have to be a little careful with that, but I understand what you're saying. If you go with and I don't want to be too discriminatory because what you're saying is true. Some young faculty members are going to be those types that are going to be in a position where they can be pushed around by the senior faculty, and you can put yourself at risk if you go with an assistant professor. So I would agree with that. So you have to be a little bit more careful with the assistant professor. So I would agree with that. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Well, I've seen situations where the student, of course, had to choose an advisor, and they chose an advisor, not a newbie, but one that'd been in the department for some time, but that particular professor did not have the respect of his colleagues.
Right.
And so what happened, the same, let's use the word animosity,
Yeah.
the same animosity they had toward that professor rubbed off on the graduate student.
Right.
The graduate student had nothing to do with it.
Yeah, that's true. That can happen. And so yeah, you have to be careful. You want to pick somebody that is going to have respect in the department, and that's true. And a lot of that dynamics can come out during the defense, and so that has to do with Professor Grayson saying very important. And that actually, so what he's actually saying is actually very important. So his point is that all of these types of decision making come in and looking at the major advisor, but he's saying you have to be a little careful looking at those relationships with the minor advisor and the major advisor as well. So you have to be careful in fleshing all of that out, all of those relationships out. That's very important, right? Yeah.
And if you get to know all your committee members
Right.
and are really convincing all of them of the quality of your work,
Right, exactly.
then you've got a whole cheering
Right,
squad.
exactly, right, that's exactly true. Yeah, and you want to be very careful about who you pick as the other committee members as well, because you're exactly right. You want everybody to be on board, everybody to be a cohesive unit, everybody to respect each other, and there not to be any type of political axes to grind between people, because if you do that, that's going to be problematic. Right, yeah.
So I have a question. Do you have some suggestions for coping skills when you do find yourself in an isolating situation?
That was very difficult in an isolated situation for me. I was isolated all the way through. I could just give you examples of isolation. I took numerous classes at the undergraduate level, with 200 people in class. I was the only African American. Even in Cornell, they had a number of graduate classes at Cornell with 100 students, 120 students. I was the only African American. And I'm the only African American in my field, professional research field now. And this goes back to the story that the Ed started off at the beginning. I was invited to give like a keynote tutorial lecture at this conference, and so I had flown out to this conference, and I walked in, and I was kind of a little under the weather that day, and I walked into the hotel, and being the only black guy there, and I walked in, and then I was just trying to check into the hotel. This big Department of Defense guy and his wife walked up to me and dropped their bags in front of me and said, you're the guy that's going to give us a tour around town or something. Put your bags in the trunk. And then I was invited to give like a keynote lecture at the conference. And then, I could have gotten black on him, but I decided. But then I decided I was too sick to do that. So I said, no sir, no ma'am, I'm not the tour guide or whatever. And so I just I walked up and checked in and went to bed and slept off my issue. And so then the next day I got up and gave my lecture. And then I was walking out the hall, and I walked past this guy, and his eyes got like that big when I walked past him, when I walked into the lecture hall. He said, so you're Professor Scales. And so, but anyway, so, you know, a lot of us have to deal with those types of isolated situations. But I guess how I dealt with it was, you know, you realize you're going to be in that type of environment, but the thing is, I look at it from this perspective, no matter where you are, you're always going to find good people anywhere. And so that's the thing about, you know, I looked at it coming from, you know, an underrepresented group in science and engineering. You know, I knew I was going to be the only African American there. But the point is, I had to take it within myself to be open-minded. I mean, just because I'm the only African American, don't be so closed-minded. There's plenty of great people out here, different than me, that I can interact with. And so that was the thing. You know, I found so many of my closest friends, you know, when I was an undergraduate and I was isolated, when I was at Cornell. You know, so many close friends I have even today that they are different parts of the world. They come to Blacksburg and visit me, or I go out and visit them. So the point is, in terms of that, you just have to be open-minded. I mean, you know that that's the circumstance, and there's plenty of great people in this world. Just because they don't look like, you know, physically they don't look like you, they're great people. So that's how I looked at it. So, yeah.
And taking the high road has a lot greater impact on all the people around you.
Right.
Because you did it that way, you know.
Right, yeah.
So, I'll ask another one if no one else
No,
wants.
they will. Erica, weigh in. Come on.
Well, I got another question.
All right, let's get the students in first. Animal science, we do that.
I wait, you know, so the young people to ask.
Erica, you have a question?
What do you do, Wayne, when you have a student that is very confident as far as their GPA and their pass records and so forth, but they are weak in terms of communication, especially written communication and illustrated communication?
You asking a tough one.
Yeah.
That's a sore. That's a sore one. Because I've had to deal with that a lot over the last couple of years, and I'm continuing to deal with it now. Basically, that is very well. I'll start out saying it this way. That is very common in science and engineering because you know, 60% of our students are international. Okay, so you know, we got that issue from the get-go, and so that's very common, and so that's something that has to be dealt with. And so, like I said, I graduated a whole bunch of PhD students over the last year, and I would say out of the half dozen I graduated over the last year or so, I think I had one U.S. student out of the 6, and he was an extraordinary communicator, extraordinary writer. He could probably write it better than I could. The other 6 were somewhat problematic. They were from Iran and India and China. They were extraordinary technically. They could pick up, and I have some Egyptian students, they could pick up the technical aspects and do extraordinary work. And I mean, they won awards for their dissertation work and so forth and so on. And so I think the first thing I have to do, I I just have to go, I have to use what comes into the university. So I think what I do is, like I said a few minutes ago, it's painful in the beginning, but it pays off in the end. I just keep a manuscript in front of them all the time. So at the beginning it's painful. Some of them have some problems, putting together sentences, but that's what I do. Every day I come in, I said, you work on this publication, and I can come in, we'll look at a research problem, we'll frame it. This is an outline of a viable research problem. This is the journal that we are targeting to get this published in, and I expect you to start writing this journal publication. And they start working on it, and then every once a week, we go over it and edit it once a week, and then slowly I teach them how to develop a style for writing a research publication. And then over time, their writing gets better and better. Same thing happens when the reviews come back from the referees. Same type of thing. This is how you respond to a referee. And again, I have to take the time. This is how you respond to a referee's question. And then, we may have to go over it a number of different times. This is how you write defensively when to reply or respond or do a rebuttal to a referee. And then after several journal publications, these students actually get pretty good. And so that has seemed to work, for me. A couple of these students have won, like Best Publication Awards. It was a lot of work for me in the evenings, and these students get out with a very substantial publication list. And like I said, they won awards and Best Paper awards for their work. But that's how I've chosen to do it. It's work for me, but it pays off in the end. If the student has the technical ability, they don't have the technical ability, then you're kind of wasting your time. But if they do have that gift for technical ability, I think it's worth it to do it that way.
For those of us looking into academia or a career in the future, do you think we need to prepare for it a different way than the past has? We just always hear that there's a bunch of postdocs. Like it's
to prepare for it different from, I'm sorry?
I guess in the past. We just hear, from my lab, just talking to people molecular biology, we hear about the number of postdocs just skyrocketing.
Right.
And the faculty positions are just kind of remaining the same.
Right.
And to me, I'm almost wondering if I should stay in molecular biology and try to find something where there'll be more like industry or career related.
Okay.
Do you think there is anything that we should prepare differently for the future?
I'll say, that's something similar in my field as well as space science. I mean, the bottom line is in basic science is just competitive for a faculty position. So I would say two things. One thing that you hit on, I would have to agree, is to be open-minded about your career path. I would say don't give up on an academic career if you want it. So I would say don't give up on it, but you have to prepare for it the right way. But if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. Be open-minded that I can go in a different career path in a government lab or industry. So you may have three different strands. You may have academia, you may have academia, government laboratory, which is fairly close to academia. And so that would be my second, if you're a person that really wants to do an academic career at a high quality research university, and that didn't quite work out, then I would do the second choice is a government lab, and then the third choice would be industry. What a lot of people do is go to that government lab and then establish themselves and then move into academia later in your career. So I think that's one viable strategy. So one thing is to prepare for academia. If it it doesn't work, try to go into the government lab, work hard in the government lab, because if you go to a good government lab, you're still gonna be doing high quality basic research, you're still gonna be publishing a lot, you're pretty much gonna be doing all the same stuff you would be doing at a university except teaching. Then you build your career, you start looking, you know, you got an impressive resume, and then, you know, a university's gonna be happy to pluck you. You know, probably, you know, by the time you start approaching mid-career, then you're gonna go in at a pretty high academic rank. So if you look at Virginia Tech, that's what Virginia Tech is starting to use as a strategy. Now, you know, we're becoming a pretty substantial university, so how do you jumpstart a research program in an area? I mean, I'm not gonna go out and hire an assistant professor. It's gonna take him 10 years, he or she, 10 years to get a research program up and going. I'm gonna go over to a government laboratory, get somebody that's already has a pretty well-established research program and bring them in, okay? And so, you know, I know we're doing that in biological sciences, life sciences, that's what we did in space science research as well. You know, we brought a big group in from the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab. So if you want that academic career, doesn't quite work out at the beginning, go to the government laboratory route, work hard there, and then, you know, when you start approaching mid-career, you know, you can move over. Now, because it's so competitive, you know, how do you get into that academic position goes back to